Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. What if the only garden space you have seems to be too hot to grow anything? Maybe your only sunny spot is against a south-facing wall on top of a concrete patio. There are solutions. Lack of rainfall this year is a growing problem in many states in the West and Southwest, as well as other parts of the country. Are there any fruit trees you can grow that are considered drought tolerant? Well, we talk about two tasty fruit trees that don't require much water once established. Also, Warren Roberts of the UC Davis Arboretum talks about a plant that will magically appear on many people's clothing this week. Shamrocks. They're part of a family of plants that has some saints and a few sinners, too. It's all on episode 85 of the Garden Basics podcast, brought to you by Smart Pots. And we'll do it all in under 30 minutes. Let's go. We like to answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics program, and we welcome your audio participation in this. You can leave a message at speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. And when we bring in the people to answer the questions, we like to bring in our favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower. And Debbie, we had a question from Eileen over in Napa, California. So let's listen to what she has to say.
Okay.
Hi. I was wondering if I could get some help with my garden question about planting summer vegetables in a really hot spot. So I rent an apartment in Napa, California, and the only place I have available to grow vegetables this summer is in my parking lot. I'd have to put the containers against the wall of the apartment building. So if you can imagine asphalt and a south-facing wall, I expect the temperature of the containers to be exceptionally warm. What plants would actually do well in a location like this, and how can I maybe keep the containers cool? I know this is unusual, but I also know that a lot of listeners probably don't have as much garden space as they would want, and maybe this would help them stretch their gardening into new corners of their yards. Thanks so much.
Well, I got to admit, Eileen is a true dedicated gardener willing to give up her parking space to garden. So there's that.
True. She's creating her own Eden outside of her apartment.
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing I would do before trying to choose what to plant would be how to cool off that area a little bit.
Cooling it off. In the summer, one of our great tools for cooling things off is water. I actually have a section of my garden that is also very hot. It is a south-facing stucco wall, and there's a raised bed there, which isn't exactly a container, but it is a container, not the type that Eileen is talking about. And I water my garden, regularly. It's on a timer and a micro sprays. For the water for the roots, I do that in the very early morning when it's recommended for less evaporation and more water conservation. But when it's really hot, I also water later in the day. I'll turn it on manually, or I'll go out with the hose and just sprinkle those plants down just for the surface. I'm not trying to water the roots. I'm just trying to provide some water that will help cool the plants off. You know how you feel on a hot day when you jump into a cold, well, it doesn't even have to be cold, a swimming pool, then you feel cooler. Water is a good way to do that. So that's number one. You're going to have to water a lot. Eileen is really correct about that being a hot spot, asphalt and stucco. She didn't say stucco, but the south-facing wall of a building. Lots of reflected light there. And the pots will suffer. When the sun hits a black plastic pot, the kind that most of our, even a green one or a brown one, the kind of pots that most of our plants are purchased in or come in when we purchase them, it'll only takes about a half an hour for full sun on the side of that pot to kill the roots. And you may have seen the results of that when you unpot something that you've purchased or that you've grown yourself, and that corner of the pot, that side of the pot was hit by full sun, you'll see almost a pie-shaped change in color in the root zone. It won't be as white or light colored as the rest of the roots in the pot are. And that's because the sun hit that for at least a half an hour, heated that corner of the pot up to 140 degrees and the soil and roots within it and killed them. So if you're growing in containers in really any outdoor situation, using a light colored pot is desirable. I've had students take number 15s, which are about 15 inches across and 15 inches tall. And we took them outside, cleaned them up, just washed them off, dried them off, and painted them a light color. That helps reflect the sun. If you can do a pot in pot situation where there's an airspace between the two pots, then you've got some natural insulation from sun. Even if it's a black pot on the outside, if there's an inch or more or so of airspace between the pots, that will prevent the interior pot from heating up quite so much. Lifting the pots off the ground is an excellent idea. Having something underneath them, a couple of bricks, or I like to buy the wheeled pot holders that you see. I like the metal ones particularly, but that you see for sale in a garden center. That way I can move the plants around if I need to. They get too crowded, or I want to clean underneath the pots, or that sort of thing, because a large pot gets heavy when it's got a plant and media and moisture and all inside of it. And that helps to get some airflow underneath the pot and lift the pot a little bit away from that asphalt can help. Shading, of course, would be ideal. At home, I use, in my backyard where nobody can see it, I use a lovely garden umbrella. And I can obviously move that around as the sun changes angles over the course of the growing season, and that will help shade the plants that I have. I've had fried tomatoes right on the vine because of this very hot spot in my garden, and the umbrella has helped tremendously. In a parking lot, I'm not sure what the landlord and tenants would put up with. But another idea is a structure, be fairly easy to make out of PVC pipes, have some long ones that sit on the ground, and then put some T pieces in there. And so you have some uprights. You can hang floating row cover or a sheet, something thin, something that lets some light through, something light colored over the top, and you can let it drape down between the wall and the pots. And those things should help cool off that plant.
How about joining a community garden? Now, it may mean joining a church and using that, but, when you don't have the right location, there are community gardens. It's just a suggestion.
Yeah, that is an idea.
Okay.
That would help as well. Eileen also asked about crops that would do well in this hot situation. I would definitely not grow peppers. Peppers like a milder climate than that. You could try tomatoes. They would need some shade, or they will really struggle. I think corn might be a good plant to try.
What every apartment manager wants to see, a field of corn.
Well, maybe you're decorating for October.
There you go. Yeah.
Or prepping for October. I think sunflowers might do well in there if and you can grow the kind for snacking seeds. I hope that it's a vandal-free area, because I think blooming sunflowers could be attractive to people who want to walk off with them, as well as the garden umbrella could be attractive to someone who thinks they need it more than you do. But if you do grow corn is wind pollinated, and so you need a patch of corn, not a row. A row is not sufficient. You'll get very poor pollination, and every single kernel of corn has to receive its own bit of pollen in order to become a corn kernel. And those the flowers of the corn are on the very top of the plant, and that's where the pollen is formed. And then a corn stalk will produce 1 or 2 ears, and out of those ears come what I was taught to call the silks. And those silks, there's 1 silk for every kernel of corn in that ear of corn, and a pollen granule has to land on and successfully travel down that tube to get to where the kernels form in order to have a corn kernel form. So one day wind might blow from the east, another day the west, another day the south, another day the north, another day some south-southeast or whatever. So you want the corn to be grown in a circle, basically, or a square patch if you're doing it in the ground, so that no matter where the wind comes from and what direction it blows on your patch, it will send pollen onto another corn plant.
That's a very good tip for anybody that's growing corn, be it sweet corn or popcorn, is don't be linear. Do not plant rows of corn unless it's a square of corn.
Right. And another thing about corn is that because of the way it pollinates, if you're growing two different types of corn, say sweet corn and popcorn, within a close distance, and what I've heard is a mile, maybe you know another number, without a barrier between them, the pollen will move from one patch to another. And so you could end up with popcorn in your sweet corn, and you'd end up breaking a tooth while you're trying to eat it, and sweet corn in your popcorn, and so you'd end up with mushy popcorn. So you really, if you're just growing containers outside your apartment in your parking spot, you really need to grow only one type of corn.
The plants that I have attempted to grow in a very similar situation on concrete next to a south-facing fence in full sun, because it's one of the few areas in my yard that get full sun. I've tried tomatoes. They were gone by July. I've tried squash, zucchini, and it lasted till August. But I think the only reason it lasted that long was because I got out there every day and opened up the big umbrella that shaded them from like 1 o'clock to about 6 o'clock. And this year, I'm going to take your advice and try corn and see what happens.
Right. The umbrella, if you do use it, would have to be or should be opened and closed on a daily basis. If we get wind at night, it could fall over and maybe onto your neighbor's car or onto the building and harm something. It's much less likely to fall over if there's a wind at night. So opening it during the day, every day, is going to be a chore. So yes, you need to consider that. As far as tomatoes, kind of by July, if you've started your tomatoes in April, by July, maybe you're tired of tomatoes. maybe it's a self-controlling situation. If the container is, well, first of all, large enough because it takes longer and kept moist, large enough and kept moist because it takes longer to heat up a larger amount of space than smaller, and a moisture amount of space than a dry amount of space. Water takes a lot more energy from light to become hot than dry air does. So if you have a large container and it's protected somehow, it's painted white, you could wrap it in aluminum foil, which is an ugly look. I don't know what your neighbors would think of that. You could do the pot and pot situation. Then the container and the media should be kept at a more moderate temperature if you use one of those techniques, or the shade overhead. And in that case, root crops might be your friend. Radishes are easy to grow and done year round, and so they would be something you could try. Carrots, typically done in the early season, but you could give it a whirl.
Garlic, yeah.
Yes, garlic.
You could do that.
So things where the productive part is underground.
I think for sort of moderating the heat coming up from the asphalt, I still like the idea of putting in a big 2x4 rectangle there and putting 4 inches of mulch in there and setting the pot on the mulch to sort of alleviate some of that heat from the asphalt. I would suggest moving, but I know what the housing situation is in Napa, so probably that's not a viable alternative.
Right. And when you say 2x4, you mean using pieces of wood that are the dimension 2x4?
Correct. Yes, a 2x4, just basically making a rectangle out of them and then filling that little rectangle that's only basically 4 inches high with 3.5 inches or so of mulch, of bark, just to cool off that surrounding area somewhat.
I think that's a good idea. And it should be wide enough, big enough in all directions that any plant parts that hang over the side of the pot would still be over that mulch.
Right.
That mulch is going to, because if they hang over the asphalt, it's going to just radiate up into their leaves. So make it bigger than you think you need it to be. It's temporary. It will drain well, although mulch itself will hold moisture, which is not a bad thing. Just keep your pot above the mulch. You can bury pots in mulch. I don't like to do it because I don't know what's going on down there, although it is a pot. But that somehow shading the south side So it would probably be just one side with that mulch itself is also a possibility.
I am concerned about how water is going to get there. If it's a parking space, there's probably not a water faucet nearby and probably not a hose nearby. And if you're thinking of, well, I'll just fill up my 2-gallon watering can at the kitchen and take it outside and water the plants, that's going to get old real quick.
Yes. And in the summer, in the high heat, especially in a high heat situation, you're going to have to water more than once a day in order to make it work.
Yeah, it really should be an automated system.
Yes, you do. Even if it's just for part of the watering, as I do. I let that do the root watering, and then I just come out and do the 4 o'clock is when I typically do it, the afternoon cool-off watering.
Hey, I just thought of an idea. If you have an old car, you could cut off the top and fill up the body of the car with soil and plant in that.
There you go. Make double use of the parking spot.
Yes. Okay, so that's not going to work either. Well, there's that community garden again.
Yes.
But this is doable. There are things you will be able to grow. In fact, you may want to think about falling in love with cool season vegetables.
Right. That's the other thing is leave it empty for the summer and just grow. It's going to be warmer, so you may be able to... Your seasons may be different than people who are growing in the ground near you. You may have a longer warm period and be able to maybe start your tomatoes earlier. I hate to say that because people love to hear that, and then they all run out and buy them.
And then there's a hailstorm in March.
Yes, which we have had this year. Yes.
Eileen, thank you for calling in your question. She called in the question via speakpipe.com, and you can do it too. Speakpipe.com/garden basics. Or you can text us the question with your pictures at 916-292-8964. 916-292-8964. You can leave a voice message there, too. Email, sure. Send it to fred@farmerfred.com. Do please tell us where you live. That can help us think more about the area in which you live and attempt to come up with a viable solution other than moving or joining a community garden, which isn't a bad solution, really.
Yeah, meet some nice people.
Exactly. Gardeners are the friendliest people.
They are.
Debbie Flower, once again, thank you for your important, vital information on this.
Always fun to talk to friendly people who garden.
We're glad to have Smart Pots on board supporting the Garden Basics podcast. Smart Pots are the original award-winning fabric planter. They're sold worldwide. Smart Pots are proudly made 100% in the USA. I'm pretty picky about who I allow to advertise on this program. My criteria, though, is pretty simple. It has to be a product I like, a product I use, a product I would buy again. And Smart Pots clicks all those boxes. They're durable, they're reusable. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value stores nationwide. To find a store near you, visit smartpots.com/Fred. It's Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred for more info and that special Farmer Fred discount on your next Smart Pot purchase. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. Droughts can happen anywhere. We're currently looking at one here in California, but it can happen anywhere in the country. Are there fruit trees, fruit bushes that might withstand an expanded drought in your area? We're at a local nursery here in the Sacramento area, and we're talking with Phil Purcell from Dave Wilson Nursery. Dave Wilson Nursery is a wholesale grower of fruit and nut trees. They sell their trees throughout the country. And Phil, when it comes to drought tolerant, tasty, I'm thinking figs and pomegranates.
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the home garden and when it comes to something that really just doesn't, you can almost neglect, figs and pomegranates is really the trees that, we send people to.
I had no idea that figs were so adaptable. You were telling me that you've been busy selling figs to the Chicago area.
Yeah, so there's a variety called Chicago Hardy. We grow like 3 or 4 varieties that are good to zone 5. Now, that being said, figs are propagated on their own rootstock. Okay, so if they were to die, once the fig is established, if they were to die back to the ground, they're like a perennial. When they come back up, they're true to type. So in the cold areas, we always suggest that if you have a fig, try to go ahead and mulch it with straw and cover it like you would your roses. That'll protect them. But if you get a heavy freeze or if you get heavy snow on them, rest assured, when that comes out in the springtime, it's going to have all season to grow out, and you still get figs.
And in the colder climates, I would think the figs probably come out a little bit earlier or later than California. I'm not sure.
They would come out later.
Later?
Yeah.
All right, so September or October?
September, yeah, is absolutely.
All right, so figs widely adaptable throughout a lot of the U.S., USDA zones 5 through 10. What about pomegranates? Pomegranates is more of a shrub-like plant that can certainly take a drought, but how hardy is that?
Pomegranates are more zone 7 through 10. Think of, the warmer climates or where you have not such a harsh winter where they can freeze back. There is one variety called AC Sweet that we acquired from Utah. And that variety has proven to be, a little bit more frost hardy. But that being said, if you're in the, up in the north or, the upper East Coast, pomegranates probably aren't your ideal candidate. But the Carolinas through the South, California, Arizona, it's a very easy plant to grow. They don't get diseases. They don't get funguses. Very drought tolerant. Very decorative. The flowers of a pomegranate they're so unique and so decorative.
Yeah, they're kind of a bell-shaped flower, and the hummingbirds love it when it's in bloom.
They do. It's they almost look a little alien. But because, everyone's kind of used to, let's say, a camellia flower or azalea, but they're very decorative in the fruit. It's something that, pomegranates are something that everyone kind of remembers their childhood around, Halloween. There are a lot of great varieties out there. Our favorite at the nursery is called Parfianca. And Parfianca doesn't have the tartness that the traditional wonderful pomegranate has. And it has a soft seed. So you can easily dress your salad with pomegranate arrows and enjoy them without, really the heavy crunch to it.
Consider these two plants a couple of bearing fruit trees or shrubs that have a little bit of drought insurance. The fig, which is adaptable all the way down to USDA zones 5, all the way up to 10. And the pomegranate, which is probably better suited for south of the Mason-Dixon line, USDA zone 7 through 9. Once these plants are established, they don't require that much water. And we should point out, too, that both are self-fertile, aren't they? They don't need a companion.
Correct. Both are self-fertile. And then, go back to the figs. There are, a few varieties that are adaptable for container gardening. And that's the other good thing about, if you live in an area that is prone to heavy freezes, if you plant your fig in a container, you can always bring it in and protect it.
What size container is best for a fig?
If at all possible, you try to get the biggest one. So think of a whiskey or a wine barrel. That would be ideal. Any type of fruit tree, the larger the container, the better success you're going to have with it.
All right, then move it under cover, make friends with your local high school football team, and when that frost is predicted, call them over to move it for you.
Bring it in, exactly.
All right, figs and pomegranates added to your list of backyard fruit trees that you should have. Phil Purcell's from Dave Wilson Nursery. Phil, thank you so much for telling us about figs and pomegranates.
Yep, absolutely, anytime.
Every week on the Garden Basics podcast, we like to talk with Warren Roberts of the UC Davis Arboretum. He's the superintendent emeritus, and he always has an interesting plant of the week for us. Now, coming up in a couple of days, it's going to be St. Patrick's Day, and when you think of St. Patrick's, what do you think of? No, not green beer. Warren, you would think about shamrocks, wouldn't you?
I do, as a matter of fact. Well, I think also about corned beef and cabbage, but shamrocks, yes. The shamrock, and it's from the Irish Gaelic, which means young clover, evidently. It was used, the connection with the Irish is that St. Patrick, in trying to explain the idea of the Holy Trinity, picked a leaf of a clover and held it up and said, "Here you are, 3 in 1. And evidently that's how it got its fame. What is a shamrock? That's a good question.
The Sunset Western Garden Book and the Sunset National Garden Book seem to be confused on the issue.
The idea of the 3 leaflets sets the tone. Trifolium repens, the white clover, Dutch clover, Ladino clover, those are some of the common names, is commonly thought to be the one that St. Patrick would have used. It's native to Ireland. There's another one called Trifolium dubium, sometimes called the lesser clover, which has a yellow flower. I read that's the one, Trifolium dubium, is the one that's grown for St. Patrick's Day in the British Isles. The Trifolium repens is the white clover that's common in lawns in much of of North America and other parts of the world. And it typically has 3 leaflets, occasionally 4. The Oxalis genus, which is not related to the clovers, typically the leaves of that genus have 3 leaflets. Oxalis corniculata, the creeping ground sorrel or wood sorrel, which is a common weed and nursery weed, is another candidate. Commercially, I've noticed that Oxalis triangularis subspecies papilionacea, which is a South American species, is sold as a shamrock, has white flowers, and it does have the 3 leaflets. It's a tough and easy plant. There's a purple form of it, too, which has become very popular.
So are you saying that there are actually good forms of oxalis, so I shouldn't just shiver whenever I hear that word?
Well, some of the weedy ones, in California, we really suffer from an oxalis called Bermuda buttercup, Oxalis pescapre, which has become a weed over much of the state, and it's almost impossible to eradicate. It's very beautiful. It is persistent. That one has not gone into the category of shamrock, though, at least as far as I know. But Oxalis triangularis has, creeping wood sorrel, Oxalis corniculata, which is very weedy, has as well. And then there's several others. Yeah,
I noticed that in the Sunset National Garden Book, they talk about another one, black medic, a medicago.
Medicago, which medicago includes the burr clover, I think. But medicago, was it lupulina, yellow clover?
Correct.
Is sometimes referred to as shamrock as well. Lots of candidates for this contest of who's going to be called a shamrock, but the more traditional ones would be the white clover, I think.
And the good part is you don't have to go out and buy one. It will find you.
Yes, it will. That's a good thought. And also, another thing is clover is actually edible. So during times of famine, it would also help people stay alive. Some of them are used in making hay. So
right, yeah. And in fairness to the Oxalis Marketing Society, there are desirable forms of oxalis that make decent plants.
Oh, there are. In fact, there are very few oxalises that are really truly weedy. But the ones that are weedy are very weedy.
Yes.
And so they give a bad name. It's kind of like when you're a kid, you're perfectly innocent and you get blamed for something that your sibling did. So the whole genus Oxalis reputation suffers from the actions of a few malcreants. Oh, another thing about St. Patrick's Day is that if you don't wear a shamrock or some reasonable facsimile, or wear something that's green, you'll get pinched.
That's right, yes. You wear green, and it doesn't have to be a 4-leaf clover?
Well, the more traditional one would be a 3-leaf clover, unless you're willing to explain not the Trinity, but the quadrivity. How do you call it Trinity when it's 4? which is theologically dubious.
Yes. Thank you, Father Warren. Anyway, for St.
You're welcome, my son. You're very welcome.
For St. Patrick's Day, yes. Wear some oxalis. Wear a shamrock.
Or a clover.
Or a clover, yes. It's a great plant of the week. And by the way, if you want to find out more about the UC Davis Arboretum, visit them online at arboretum.ucdavis.edu. Warren Roberts, thanks so much for that.
You're welcome. That was fun.
Thanks for listening to Garden Basics with Farmer Fred, brought to you by Smart Pots. Garden Basics comes out every Tuesday and Friday. It's available on many podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeart, Stitcher, and many more. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave a comment or a rating. That helps us decide which garden topics you'd like to see addressed. And again, thank you.